Hello students, welcome to the NPTEL online course Visual Communication Design for Digital Media. In the last two lecture, we have discussed the generic methodology of visual design methodology. Today onwards, we will go deep into the different paradigms of visual communication design for digital medias and their methodologies. So today as we will discuss in details with animation and game design methodologies, and particularly the part of visual communication design part of animation and game design, and then visual design for the web, and we will not discuss the programming part of the web design. We will only discuss the visual communication design part of the web design, as well as we will also discuss some user interface design process and interaction or human computer interaction design process as well, because this is closely linked with visual communication design. And then we will shortly discuss the graphic design process, the visual communication element, that is the complete process of graphic design is visual communication design process, that we will discuss after that. So today we will start with animation and game design methodologies, and here we are only, as the course suggests, we are only discussing the visual design part of the animation and game design. There are a lot of programming and other parts of the game design. Even the cinematography part comes in the animation and game design, that we are not discussing, as it is the scope out of the scope of this course. So animation, as we all know, is a film created with illusion of motion with graphical images. So there won't be any real actor and actress and the real natural setup. So all this right now in today's paradigm, it is digitally created. But traditionally, as we see the traditional form of animation was mainly hand painted graphical images, and they were actually moved into and changed into 24 more than 24 frames per second, that is 24 fps. If they move in more than 24 fps per second, the frames move, then we can have an illusion of continuous motion. So there will be a continuity in the time frame. So that was the traditional process of animation, where handmade hand painted images were there. And if we want to create a stop motion animation, then there has to be a less than 24 frames, so that we can create the particular visual style of stop motion. So there won't be any continuity in the time frame. So the picture frames will break and the new picture frames will appear. It depends on how many it depends on the style of the stop motion, how many frames we select, but it has to be definitely less than 24, otherwise it will be a continuous normal animation. So if we try to find out what was the animation's earlier origin in terms of Indian context, then we can see there are many other forms which was not animation, but which was the graphical storytelling and narratives of our traditional Indian origin. So for example, there was a shadow puppetry of Andhra Pradesh. This is the first image is that. So the shadow puppets were the leather puppets that was created by hand painting and leather cutting, cutting the leathers and hand painting, and each and every different joineries were created differently, and then they were joined together with stitched together. And this was done, this is the process of shadow puppetry here in the picture you can see. So there was a white background and all these shadow puppets were there just behind the background, and it will be backlit. So from the back side there will be illumination, and so that the colors and movements of the shadow puppets were there. So these were the traditional South Indian, mainly Andhra Pradesh was the origin. That was the traditional storytelling process. From this we created animation in digital with the emergence of digital media and platform. We created adopted animations which evolved from this. Even there were examples in Rajasthan, like covered wooden shrine of Rajasthan was also related to the narrative, and even in Bengal and Odisha there were scroll paintings which was of a traditional form of narratives. And in the traditional form of narratives, as we can see in animation, we have sound and dialogues. So in these traditional narratives, there were songs which accompanies this puppet's motion. So visual as well as audio was also there in this traditional form of narratives. This is a chart. We are not. I am not going in details of this. So where the new animators, the contemporary animators, were adapting this Indian traditional style and making new animations using this. So this is actually an example of a paradigm shift from a traditional media, which was for example in Mukundan Reels, the first example, it was a applique stitch, which Nina Sabnani, the animator as well as the professor of IDC, has adopted and translated that into a new media application, which is animation. So if we take other examples of films which is adopted from a 2D painting, we have Father and Daughter by Michael Dudok, which won Academy Award in 2000 for short animation movie. So this was hand painted, but then it was transferred into the digitalized and computer generated animation is created using this. So you can see this is all hand painted watercolor. So frame by frame it has been painted, and then as according to the rule, more than 24 frames were painted per second, and then it was the animation was created. So another example is Eric Curl's animation of a very hungry caterpillar, and there is also I See a Song. So here in this process, acrylic sheets are used as a base, and acrylic paintings, acrylic colors are used on each and every acrylic sheet to paint each and every frame, and then after that each and every frames were shot, and then 24 frames were repeated, more than 24 frames were repeated per second, and the animation is created by that process. So if we discuss the generic design methodology of animation, so this will be first selecting the story or story writing if we start from the scratch, then generating a screenplay which will be adopted in the animation. So proper screenplay of with dialogue and each and every frame's detail has to be done, and based on that screenplay a storyboard has to be evolved. We will discuss what storyboard and other things are in the next slide. So from storyboard, then the selection of particular style of animation, whether it has to be 2D animation or 3D animation, and in 2D animation or in 3D animation, what kind of particular style, color palette, what kind of textures and illumination level, each and everything has to be decided. And in part of that, there is also, from that we have to design the character, and as well as the setup or the background has to be designed, and then the creation of the movie has to be done with the movements of characters and changes of the background or set, and then the audio has to be added on this. Our audio can also be synced before, whether audio comes first or animation comes first, that is up to the animator, but then audio has to be synced with the visual design. We will discuss the visual design process, not the audio part and the story writing or screenplay writing part. So we will discuss with the selection of a particular style of animation and character design, how we can design the character based on a particular style, selected style, and how it has to be, what are the process of creating a movie after that. So we will take a case of a 2D animation first, and a 2D animation is designed. This two are what we are seeing here. Two are already designed animation in 2D platform. So First is both of these animations are derived from a single storyboard. So storyboard remained the same, and yeah, in both the animation only the visual style is different. So how on based on a particular storyboard, different two visual style has been generated and two different animation has been generated, that we'll discuss. So first one is based on a traditional Indian narrative, that is Bengal Patachitra. This is the style of from where this animation is generated, or the mood board, which in the mood board the style of Bengal Patachitra is selected here. And in this one, the second option, the same on the same storyboard, traditional serigraphy or woodcut or linocut printing, that is the traditional print media style, that has been taken as a visual inspiration. So first, in case of 2D animation, we will go into detail the visual communication design part of 2D animation. So after designing the characters and background, each and every keyframe has to be composed and according to the storyboard. And then the other this is done in this particular case is in Photoshop. Then each and every frames are composed frames are composed with iterating the character as well as the background. This is also done in Photoshop, because this animation was actually a stop motion animation, so they were less than 24 frames per second. So this was possible to do with Adobe Photoshop, otherwise other softwares has to be used. And then the sound effects is merged with the timeline. So storyboarding, as we were discussing earlier, is it contains the description of a particular shot. And the keyframe of the shot, the first shot from where the it will start, has to be sketched, like here in the example. And then the camera angle, what kind of camera angle, whether it is low angle, high angle, with the starting camera angle has to be written. And then what kind of camera movement, whether there will be a pan shot, whether there will be a dolly shot, whether it will zoom in, that has to be written as well. And then details of the sound and everything has to be written. So this is a typical format of a storyboard. So here the keyframe, the first initial frame has to be drawn and the description has to be written here. So here we are seeing a famous example from a storyboard of Pather Panchali, that's by Satyajit Ray. He won Oscar for his lifetime achievement in movie. So this is also applicable in movie and also in animation. So this is the storyboard created by Satyajit Ray himself. So in case of this animation, this was the storyboard created. So the keyframe is drawn, each and every keyframe is drawn, and then the what kind of the description of the shot, and the camera, in this cases this was still camera. Here in this case there was a tilt upwards in the camera, which was also discussed. Here the camera was dolly and front dolly. So this everything, and here it was pan left, in the left side there will be a pan shot. So everything was written, even the sound effects were also written in the storyboard. So after making the storyboard, then a particular visual style has to be selected, and here comes the main part of a visual designer. The visual communication design is the most important here. So here in this case, what we are discussing, Patachitra, which is a traditional Indian narrative of Bengal, which is selected as a visual style. So here there are two different Patachitra, three different style of Patachitra in Bengal. One is the Kalighat, which is urban Kolkata is the center for this Patachitra, and other two was the Midnapur and Birbhum, which were the other two centers, which Midnapur and Birbhum Patachitras are mostly similar in style, but Kalighat Patachitra is very different from Midnapur Patachitra. So in this animation, all these Patachitras, some of the elements from these Patachitras of Bengal has been adopted into stop motion animation. And for this, I interview ethnographic survey, or the interview is done with a original Patachitrakar, whose name is Maina Chitrakar. She is also done some graphic narratives with designed some graphic narratives with Tara books. So this is a photograph of ethnographic survey to understand the color palette, texture, what kind of the design principles and elements of the traditional art form. So here is the stylistic analysis of design principles and elements of Bengal Patachitra. So here we can see the color palette is derived from this. So this is an element of design, and also the line quality, if we see in the photograph, so line quality, there is a black and red and as well as white borders which they use as a as highlighting the figures. So this is the line quality. So we have black and red borders here around the particular shape, color filled shape, and white borders to show the jewelries. And here we can see a flat color, so no gradient is used, and the color used is very opaque in nature. That was the Midnapur Patachitra. Now we are seeing the Kalighat Patachitra, where there is a difference. The colors are drastic, colors are very soft, and the vibrant colors are not used, and more of a neutral color palette that is derived from the Kalighat Patachitra. And also the line outlines were not in all the places, and also we can see there is no flat, there is less areas where there are flat colors, where here in the red and black borders are there, which is flat, but mostly the skin colors and the draperies where the gradient color shades are used in that. And also if we look at the design principles and what kind of ideologies, what kind of ethos they have in the design. So we have in Kalighat Patachitra the human faces, and the Midnapur Patachitra the human faces, they are quite different. The intricacy, the line quality, the thicknesses of line, the colors, they are also quite different. That has been analyzed first before going to the character design for the final animation. So here are the textures which are derived from the particular style. So fish scales, bird's wing, and different things as to depict different things, different textures and different colors has been used. So the texture, which is also a element of design, which has been derived from the particular source or the origin of original source of the style. And also what kind of borders, line qualities, and Patachitra also has a border, which are the gutter spaces of different dividing, which divides different key frames of Patachitra. There is a border, there is a floral border there, which is also taken from this from this traditional art form. And also if we see, as we were discussing, these were the origin of our animation. So here we can see this is actually the storyboard evolved from this. So these are actually the key frames, and each and every frame has one story, one song attached with this. So one particular frame is actually the key frame and the main frame where all these characters were there, and a particular song will be attached with each and every frame of the pattas. And the frames are divided with this particular kind of borders, which which is there in the this is in the Midnapur and Kalighat Patachitra. So while selecting a style, we also need to know what kind of style we can adopt in animation, and what kind of style we will be difficult for adoption in animation, and what kind of style will be much easy to adopt in animation. So here from a paper of myself and Dr. Shatarupa Thakurta Roy, we discussed the features to select a particular art form which can be adopted in animation, because many of the art forms might not be easily adopted in the animation without destroying the art's particular elements and principle of design and the ethos, particular nature of the art form. So here the first principle was the recognizability of the character. So the characters in the particular source art form has to be properly recognizable. So here there is a recognizability graph derived from a different art form of traditional art form of India. So we have Orli, Gond, Madhubani, Bengal Pattachitra, and also we have taken Ravi Verma's art style, because that's not a traditional vernacular art, but the classical the famous painter Ravi Verma's painting is also taken to understand the recognizability, the feature of recognizability. So here we can see the Worli. If we look at the character and the backdrop, there are very less elements of design, and the very less features of features are there to depict the particular character and the setup. So here if we start transferring Orli into animation, all the characters might look similar. So that is a problem with the Orli, but if we go in this direction, Gond and Madhubani has a higher value of recognizability, but Bengal Pattachitra has a more recognizable. The characters portrayed in Bengal Pattachitra, they are more recognizable than Madhubani. Even the Raghurajpur Pattachitra's characters portrayed in Raghurajpur Pattachitra also are more recognizable than Madhubani and Gond, and definitely Worli style. So there are more details in the eyes, more details in the characters, and more details in the backdrop. But the Ravi Verma's Pattachitra, as it is a more it depicts every features in minute detail. So the less level of abstraction is there. So as we are going in the left hand side, the more level of abstraction is there. Orli is the most abstract. So all the features are not features of the character and the backdrop is not defined. And the Ravi Verma's painting is the more it's the less abstract in nature. So if we translate Ravi Verma's style, which will be very easy to animate. And the next feature of adapting, selecting an animation style is the movement capacity of the character. Many of the animation style might not have a proper, might not have all the movement, different kind of movement capability. But in Bengal Pattachitra, all the hands and legs, all the limbs can be moved in a different direction. As because they portray in the Bengal Pattachitra, if you see, they portray hands and all the limbs position in a different various position. In some of the traditional style, like Worli style, the hands and limbs position will be particularly in this manner. So we can see the position of the hands, which will be on the side of the shoulder. In Gond also it will be in the side of the shoulder. Madhubani, the face will be turned always on the right side or in front. But Bengal Pattachitra doesn't follow all these guidelines. So there are different, there are possibilities of the limb movements in different directions. The same thing is also with the faces. In Bengal Pattachitra, which is very rare in the Indian traditional style, the faces turn in the fourth 3/4 angle or the 45-degree angle in the with the picture frame. So that gives the details of nose, eye, and even the face profile, which in terms of Madhubani we can see it's always mostly turns on the right, on the side, and Gond it mostly turns in the front side. So it doesn't give a nose feature and the face profile. So also this feature gives provision of using different camera angles. And in Bengal Pattachitra also sometimes the face turns on the purely in the front, and sometimes it also turns on the side. Different angles of portraying face is used in the Bengal Pattachitra. So there is a provision of using different camera angles in while adopting this style into animation as well. And while decoding the style, the different features of the Bengal Pattachitra is also used in the final animation. This is the frame of the final animation, where the borders which I was showing earlier has been used to during the transition of one keyframe to another keyframe. So this borders appears while transferring from one keyframe of the animation to the another frame of the animation. Even in the animations features, the flat colors and the line outline are painted in Photoshop. It is painted in a different layers, and in the final animation, which I will show you later, in the animation, this layer with the outline and the layer with the flat color moves differently, so that to depict the color, the motion of the brush of of the traditional artisan while painting the Bengal Pattachitra, that is depicted in the animation by the moving two different layers of color and the outline. So we come to the character design. The character design, here we have the examples of character design of ghosts, which is done again by Satyajit Ray in his film Gupigain and Bagabain. So he drew all these characters of ghosts, how the ghosts will appear in this. There is a particular song in this movie. So during for that he have designed the characters, which is actually a Chhaya, which is adopted from the principles of Chhaya Natak. So there is a white frame and all these ghosts, the dancers in Kathakali style, they dance and then they appear as it looks like a Chhaya Natak. So you can go and see this famous movie, and particularly this particular portion of this movie. Coming back to the particular case of our 2D animation design, the characters are designed from the traditional art style as well as thinking about the contemporary features of people. So this here we can see this was the traditional feature of the character, while the hairstyle and the ornamentations were based on the traditional socio-cultural attributes, where from that a contemporary human figure is evolved from this traditional features. Even the other characters has been designed from this traditional style. While also designing different animals, the traditional, the blend of traditional and contemporary is there. So this is a traditional Bengal Kalighat Pattachitra. This is a Pattachitra by Jamini Roy, who is a famous painter from Bengal. So who also adopted this stylistic adoption of cat's character design from this traditional art form. So this is the final design of the cat, which is also there in the animation as a animal character. And here we can see a lion, which is designed from based on a Narasimha, or also the lions portrayed in the Kalighat Pattachitra and the Bengal Pattachitra looks like this, which is not like a typical lion. So that traditional style has been retained while designing the characters for this animation. And now coming to the set design and the backdrop design, even the contemporary vehicles and the contemporary which is there in the Kolkata setup, which is evolved from Kolkata's scenario, is translated into the traditional art style. So there is a hand-pulled rickshaw and the a shared taxi, which is a public taxi, which is designed from the particular design based on the visual style of a traditional art form. And here is the setup where the typography, we also discussed the typography, how typography is important in the visual communication design. Typography is adopted to create a scenario, create a background of this animation, and the features of the architectural features and elements of from the buildings and local vegetations has been adopted in the backdrop of the to create the backdrop setup for the animation. So this is the final design, and we'll see the animation movie of this the small clip of the animation movie. So, we have seen the animation which is based on the traditional Indian Bengal Patachitra. Now, based on the same storyboard, another 2D animation is designed, which is based on the same storyboard, but the visual style is different, where the visual style is woodcut, linocut or serigraphy's style, which is adopted in the animation. So, here we can see the typical woodcut, and this is how the visual analysis, again the same process has been adopted. So, visual analysis of the source, the origin which is there in the mood board, the of the design, and how that is translated in the final design. So, here the textures of the woodcut, this is a woodcut print. So, woodcut print texture is translated in the final animation design. And the color palette of a woodcut, if we see, the woodcut is and serigraphy or linography is done, which is a traditional print media. So, the different wood prints will be there for each and every color. So, one print for one form, the print of the wood will be only on one color, and the next wood print will be on the next color, and those will superimpose on each and on each other. So, that will generate, that might generate a third color if there is a superimposing area. So, here we can see if there is a blue color printed first, and then is a pink color printed, which will give a purple color in the section. So, here in the, if we consider this as a serigraphy or woodcut or linocut print. So, first there is a blue color printed all over the picture frame. Then if we add a pink color, so then there will be a purple color which will generate in the intersection between blue and pink. So, there is also some part of the pink highlights, you can see if you see minutely, pink highlights are also there, where there is no blue color, only pink is there. And then after that there is a black color which will be printed on top of this. So, there will be a pure black element on this, on top of this. So, that is how the color palette is also, color palette of the final animation design is also derived from the serigraphy's principle. And here also each and every colors, as we discussed earlier, different colors move differently. So, to give a different the feel of a different color, so that you will see in the animation. So, the pink colors layer, blue colors layer and the black colors layer, they move differently to give a illusion of 3 different layers printed differently. So this is the again for the character design, the similar the serigraphy and lithography style is kept in mind, as well as the features of cityscape as well as human and animal figures has been designed accordingly. So as we have seen, we have discussed the process of 2D animation. Right now moving on to the other part of animation, 3D animation, which we also will decide, but the visual designers part of 3D animation is limited, because this will be the character designers or 3D model, the people who do the 3D modeling with different softwares, they will be involved in the 3D animation. So visual designers will design the develop the character, the concept design for the characters, and then 3D animators, 3D who models the 3D characters and the set, they will model it, and then the then the sound and sound engineers and the sound audio will be added to this. But we will discuss the 3D animation process. So one example is Up by Pixar. So there if we see the first, the visual communication designers, they will sketch the concept design for the characters which will be there in the animation. Then this is the final design for the characters, which is designed in the 3D softwares, where 3D the characters has to be modeled first, and then each and every textures will be added on the character, and colors, everything has to be added on the character, and these characters with the bone tool, or the process of in which process depends on which software you are using. So the characters will be character will move, even the set and background will change in the time frame, and the animation will be created. So this is a typical 3D animation. But there is another example, if we see Disney's Paperman. So this will look like a 2D animation. If you see this animation which is available in YouTube, you can see this. So this animation by first glance will look like a 2D animation, and it gives the effect of hand painted old Disney style, which we see in the traditional Disney style, where each and every frames are painted, and then again 24 frames per second will move 24 frames will move per second, and then that was the traditional 2D painted animation style. But here in this particular animation Paperman, it is actually a 3D animation, which is not the traditional Disney style, but they wanted to keep the style and the visual language of visual elements and visual principles of a 2D traditional Disney animation in this 3D animation. So again they have definitely gone through the line qualities, what kind of particular texture, what kind of color is there in the 2D animation. So here we can see the particular lines which the visual communication designer, the animator who sketched, and the line qualities are taken from this, and then they finally made a 3D model, because 3D animation is right now easy and is less labor intensive. So they adopted a 3D animation process to generate a visual look of a 2D animation. So this is the first sketch of a 2D animation. Then this is the 3D modeled version of the particular character, and this is how the 3D model of the first image here you can see is the 3D model character, and here the line qualities, colors, and all the design elements is taken from the 2D animation, is superimposed on this. So all this using a particular software, they have identified a particular they have translated the 3D volume into 2D lines, and then the final animation looks like a 2D animation. But through a 3D through a process adopting a methodology of a 3D animation, they have generated a style of 2D animation. So right now moving on to the game design, so that is also quite similar of animation. If we take out the part of a gameplay and a development part of this, which is not part of the visual communication design. So storyboarding, character design and set design also is there in the game design as well. So that is a visual communication component of a game design. So that also we'll discuss a small game design, which is also a 2D game design based on a Flash platform. So this is the game which is designed by myself and developed by Mayuk Chakraborty, and this is available in Samsung Smart TV. So this is a TV game. So this is the screenshot of the different stages of the game. There in the process also again it is translated from traditional Indian style. So here we can see different influence of different traditional Indian style, as well as Jamini Roy's Patachitra is also there was in the mood board. So here we can see influences of Thangka painting for designing the cloud. Here we can see the particular Chhau dance mask was in the mood board to generate the style for the demon of the game, and even the some of the features are evolved from the Jamini Roy's Patachitra. And by mixing different traditional and traditional Indian art form, the design is created while designing the character as well as the background, and then the final design is there. So this is the final game. We'll see the final game. So we have discussed the animation and game design methodologies in this lecture. So in next lecture we will move on to the web design methodologies, and then we will briefly discuss the graphic design methodologies. Thank you.